for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Welcome back to Spiritual Food for Thought. I thank you for joining me once again. I'm going to be going through a series of just New Testament verses that need to be part of your theology, or at least they should. I lay this upon the foundation of the Old Testament, and there's been a lot of things I've been pulling forth from there in the past, and even the previous video, if you want to look at that, with Deuteronomy 13, verses 1 to 5. That's very important, and it's one of the reasons why I like to say that a lot of the modern church does not have a biblical foundation for their faith. The biblical foundation for their faith, if they have any, is about this. This is what they believe. And the problem is that this is built upon the law and the prophets. And if we took God as true from the beginning, we'd have a much different approach to the New Testament, but that's not where we start. We start in left field. We come in to the modern church and then listen to the pastors and the study Bibles, and they tell us what to believe. And we're already convinced that all their interpretations are true because we don't have a biblical foundation. So I'm going to be sharing some verses from the New Testament that I really want you to think about. I'm going to throw them out there, and I'm going to provide some food for thought. And I actually recorded just one long video of this. I thought it'd be better just to break it up into some smaller ones that are more digestible, a little more succinct, a little more specific topic as far as focusing on one verse in each one or one passage. So today we're going to Acts chapter 17, verse 11. And this is happening during the ministry of Paul. I'm going to read from 10 to 13 and then focus on verse 11. And the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas by night unto Berea, who, coming thither, went into the synagogue of the Jews. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the scriptures daily, whether those things were so. Therefore many of them believed, also of honorable women, which were Greeks, and of the men not a few. But when the Jews of Thessalonica had knowledge that the word of God was preached of Paul at Berea, they came hither also, and stirred up the people. So, a couple things here. What people seem to miss, because there's nothing wrong with searching the scriptures daily to see if things are true. We should. But one thing that people are often missing here is Paul brought certain messages to believers. He did. He brought certain messages to different people, whether they were Jews or Greeks. He wrote these epistles to the churches that are also contained in the Bible. And people were able, at the time he was doing it, to search the Old Testament scriptures to see if what he was saying was true. The problem here that I want to focus on is that the modern church believes Paul taught all sorts of stuff which is against the Old Testament. And if that was true, we wouldn't be able to search the Old Testament scriptures daily to see if what Paul was telling was the truth. That was part of a litmus test, and that's one reason I already pointed you back to Deuteronomy 13, verses 1 to 5, because it's the same thing with Jesus Christ. If Jesus was teaching against the Old Testament scriptures, against the commandments of God, according to Deuteronomy 13, 1 to 5, he would be an evil, false prophet worthy of death, as would Paul, which is why the Jews and the Greeks who were in the synagogue at Berea on the Sabbath day when Paul was preaching the word of God, they were able to check Paul's message against the law and the prophets, against the Old Testament scriptures, to see if he was telling the truth. And when they found out that he wasn't a false prophet, according to Deuteronomy 13, 1 to 5, they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the scriptures daily whether those things were so, and they believed. They believed. Okay, we don't just believe because somebody says something. We find evidence that what they say is true. A way to make sure that what people are bringing forth in the New Testament is true is that it doesn't contradict the foundation upon which it was laid. We need that biblical foundation for our faith, because if the law and the prophets aren't true, then the New Testament, is built on that foundation. So my exhortation to people for them to consider is, if you think that, Jesus is teaching against the dietary law or teaching against the Sabbath, then people wouldn't be able to search the scriptures daily to see, if what he was teaching was true. because he would have been teaching something false and they would have rejected him. Same thing with Paul. If you think Paul is teaching against these things, look at the video I did on Colossians chapter 2. That talks about how Paul is exhorting people to keep the dietary law, keep the new moons, keep the feast days, keep the Sabbath. That's what he's doing in that passage. But the modern church twists it 180 degrees and says, nope, he was doing something completely different. Well, he wouldn't pass the Acts 17:11 test, would he? If that's what he was actually doing. No, he wouldn't. We wouldn't be able to search the Old Testament to make sure if what he was telling was true or not, because he would have been teaching something false. His message never contradicted what God laid forth in the Old Testament. Wrap your mind around that if this is a new thought for you. I'm actually going to focus on a couple different ones as we move forward in this series, but Paul was not ever teaching against the law of God. And if you think he was, it's because you're not being Berean. I'll see you next time. Be blessed.
Spiritual food for thought.